For human inheritance, I decided to look at Lynch syndrome as a genetic disorder. So, what is Lynch syndrome? Lynch syndrome is also known as hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer because it specifically affects the colon. It does increase the risk for many other types of cancer. However, the colon cancer is the most prevalent in people who do have Lynch syndrome. Oftentimes, they just have benign polyps in the colon, but in other cases, they do turn into malignant tumors. For Lynch syndrome, about 3 to 5% of those who have colorectal cancer every year have it due to Lynch syndrome. About 140,000 new cases occur each year, and as I said, 3 to 5% are caused by Lynch syndrome, which is actually a pretty large number each year just from this genetic disorder. Another side effect of Lynch syndrome or criteria for it is that it occurs at an earlier age than expected for colon cancer. So it usually occurs at the age of 45 to 50. And if you do have Lynch syndrome, parents, children, sisters, and brothers have a 50% chance of also having it. There are two types of Lynch syndrome. There's Lynch syndrome 1, which is the familial colon cancer, and then Lynch syndrome 2, which is cancer in the GI system. So the genome. So it's autosomal dominant, as I mentioned, because if a parent has it or a brother or sister, you are at 50% chance of having it. And it's a result of a defective mismatch in the MMR proteins. And those proteins include the MLH1, MSH2, MSH6, PMS2, and EPCAM gene. So these variations increase the risk of developing. It's genetically heterogeneous disease, so you just need to have the dominant trait, and it can be caused by silencing of various genes or deletion. The two genes that play the largest role, though, include the MSH2 and the MLH1, providing 60% and 30% respectively of Lynch syndrome each year. For the phenotype, as I mentioned earlier, it occurs at an earlier age than the general population for cancer. For colon cancer, it usually occurs at age 45 for those with Lynch syndrome, which is the main type of cancer that this syndrome causes. It can cause other cancers, though, as I mentioned. It can cause cancer in the stomach, the ovary, the skin, brain, the small intestine, really anywhere. However, it's those polyps on the colon, as I mentioned before, that is caused by Lynch syndrome that really leads to cancer, which are the gastrointestinal polyps, and as I mentioned, the average onset of 45 years. So for biological patterns, I keep talking about how it occurs mainly in the colon because it does in the proximal colon, and it's a mutation that inactivates the MLR gene, leads to the accumulation of cell mutations, which leads to cancer. And in this photo, you can see kind of what is happening. So in that top picture, it's the cellular phenotype, which I just talked about. It looks at the normal colon, and then it looks like the smaller polyps, which are usually ones that are benign, and then looks at the polyps that are greater than 8 millimeters, which are usually turned into a carcinoma because of the accumulation of cells. And then in the bottom one is the molecular event, kind of what's happening in the pathway. So you have this heterozygous germline mutation occurring that encodes the defective protein and then predisposes someone to cancer. Then you have a somatic loss of the wild type allele with consequent MMR loss, resulting in the replication errors, and then which leads to the accumulation of somatic mutations, and then leading to the mutation that causes Lynch syndrome. So as I mentioned, the mode of inheritance is autosomal dominant. It's 50% of offspring of affected individuals inherit a mutant allele. This is a pretty simple diagram just showing that if you have an affected father and an unaffected mother, 50% of the kids will be affected, 2 of the 4 children that they have. So significant. So I chose Lynch syndrome because it's such a big disorder that I actually had never heard of, because if one family member has it, you are at a greater risk for also having it. So it greatly increases your risk. My grandmother also had, this is kind of why this one was of interest to me. I don't believe it was Lynch syndrome. It was later in life. However, it was a kind of a concern as I was researching about it. Um, but there are, if you do know that you have Lynch syndrome, like you carry the mutation, there are ways to treat it, which is obviously important. Um, and then testing is also very important. Regular screenings, that's especially important if you know, like family members had an early onset of colon cancer, like especially multiple. Once you start having multiple family members, that's when testing becomes extremely important, so that you can prevent it earlier in life. And then here are some of my sources, most of my sources I've used for my PowerPoint, and that is the end.